Tanashi had just returned home from university that evening. The long bus ride back to Harare had left him tired, but he was happy to finally be home. He expected the usual quiet evening, maybe dinner, maybe a short conversation with his father before going to his room. But the moment he stepped inside, something felt different. The house felt colder, quieter than usual. Before he could even put his bag down, his stepmother Lillian appeared from the hallway. "Tanashi," she said sharply. "Come to the living room. We need to talk." Her voice was calm, but there was something heavy behind it, the kind of tone that immediately makes your stomach tighten. Tanashi slowly walked into the living room. His father, Patrick, was already sitting on the couch, staring down at the floor like he was studying the carpet. Kelvin, his stepbrother, was leaning back in a chair with a small smirk on his face. Something about the whole scene felt planned. Lillian crossed her arms and looked straight at Tanashi like she was talking to a stranger. "You have 30 days to move out," she said coldly. For a moment, Tanashi thought he heard her wrong. "What?" he asked quietly. "You heard me," she replied. 30 days. This house is not your future anymore." Her words hit the room like a sudden storm. Tanashi looked at his father, expecting him to say something, anything. But Patrick didn't even lift his head. He just sat there in silence. That silence hurt more than the words. Tanashi's chest tightened. This was the house he grew up in, the place where every memory of his childhood lived. And now he was being told to leave it like he was just some guest who had stayed too long. Kelvin chuckled softly under his breath. But Tanashi didn't laugh. He just stood there, completely stunned, trying to understand how his own home had suddenly turned into a place that no longer wanted him. For a few seconds, the room stayed completely silent after Lillian's words. Tanashi was still trying to process what he had just heard. 30 days. Move out. Like the house he grew up in suddenly didn't belong to him anymore. He looked at Lillian again, hoping maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding. But her expression didn't change. She looked calm, almost satisfied. Then she spoke again, this time with even more confidence. "Your father already transferred the house to me," she said. "Everything is in my name now." The words felt heavy in the air. Tanashi slowly turned his head toward his father. Patrick was still sitting on the couch, quiet and uncomfortable. His hands were folded together, his eyes still avoiding Tanashi's. "Dad, is that true?" Tanashi asked softly. Patrick shifted slightly but still didn't look up. He cleared his throat, but no real answer came out. That silence felt like confirmation. Lillian gave a small smile, like she had just proven her point. "So yes," she continued, "this house belongs to me now, and I've decided it's time for you to move on and start your own life." Across the room, Kelvin leaned back in his chair with a smug grin spreading across his face. He looked like someone watching a movie he had already seen before. "Come on, bro," Kelvin said casually. "You're a grown man now, university student and everything. You should be able to survive without living here forever." The way he said it made it sound like Tanashi had been freeloading all these years. Tanashi felt a slow burn of humiliation rising in his chest. This was the same house where he learned to walk, the same living room where his father used to help him with homework. Every wall in this place carried memories. And now suddenly, he was being treated like some unwanted guest. Lillian walked over to the coffee table and straightened a magazine like the conversation was already finished. "You have 30 days, she repeated calmly. "That's more than fair." Kelvin gave another quiet laugh. Tanashi looked around the room again. The same furniture, the same walls. But somehow the place felt completely different now, like he didn't belong there anymore. They were all acting like the decision had already been made, like the house had officially changed hands and there was nothing he could do about it. But there was one thing Lillian didn't know, one small detail buried deep in the past, a decision his father had made years ago, a secret that could change everything. And the moment that secret came out, this entire conversation would look very different. Standing there in the living room, listening to Lillian talk like the house already belonged to her, Tanashi suddenly remembered something from years ago, a memory he had almost forgotten, but now it came back clearly. It was a quiet evening about 5 years earlier. Tanashi had just finished high school and was getting ready to leave for university. That night his father, Patrick, had asked him to sit with him outside on the small patio behind the house. It wasn't a serious moment at first. They were just drinking tea and talking about the future. But then Patrick's tone changed. He looked around the yard for a moment like he was thinking carefully about what to say. Finally he said, "Son, I want to show you something, but you have to understand why I'm doing it." Tanashi remembered feeling confused at the time. Patrick went inside and came back with a brown envelope. It looked like a set of official papers. He handed it to Tanashi and told him to open it. Inside were legal documents. At the top of the page were words Tanashi didn't fully understand back then. Property trust agreement. Patrick explained it slowly. Years earlier, after Tanashi's mother had passed away, Patrick had quietly created a legal trust for the house. The documents clearly stated that the property was protected for Tanashi, not for sale, not transferable, not controlled by anyone else. It was meant to stay his. "I did this to protect you," Patrick had said that night. Tanashi had looked at him in surprise. "Protect me from what?" Patrick gave a tired smile. "Life gets complicated," he said. "Families change. People change. Sometimes even good people make decisions that create problems." He didn't say Lillian's name directly, but the message was clear. "I just want to make sure no matter what happens, you'll always have a home," Patrick had added. At the time, Tanashi didn't think much about it. He trusted his father. And honestly, he never imagined a situation where he would need those papers. So he kept the envelope safely stored away and went on with his life. Years passed. He focused on school, university, and building his future. The documents stayed hidden in his drawer, almost forgotten. But now, standing in the living room while Lillian confidently claimed the house belonged to her, that memory suddenly felt very important, because the truth was simple. The house had been protected long before this conversation ever happened, and the person it was protected for was Tanashi. Lillian just didn't know it yet. But that quiet promise his father made years ago was about to change everything. For a moment, no one in the living room said anything. Lillian had just finished repeating her order, and the message was clear in her voice. 30 days. That was the time she was giving him to leave the house. Tanashi stood there quietly. Inside his mind, the memory of that brown envelope was still fresh. The legal trust. His father's words years ago. The promise that this house would always be protected for him. But he didn't say any of that. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. And he didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he slowly took a breath and looked directly at Lillian. His voice was calm when he finally spoke. "You gave me 30 days, he said. Lillian nodded slightly, waiting for him to continue. She looked completely confident, like the situation was already settled. But then Tanashi added something no one in the room expected. "But I'll give you 24 hours. The room went completely silent. Kelvin stopped moving. Patrick finally lifted his head. Even Lillian looked confused for a second, like she wasn't sure she had heard him correctly. Then suddenly she laughed. Not a small laugh, a loud, mocking one. 24 hours, she repeated, shaking her head like the idea was ridiculous. She looked over at Kelvin, who was already smiling. "You hear that?" she said sarcastically. "He's giving us a deadline now." Kelvin leaned forward in his chair, clearly enjoying the moment. "Seriously, bro," he said with a smirk. "You're the one getting kicked out. What exactly are you going to do in 24 hours? His tone was full of sarcasm. "Where will you even go?" Kelvin added. Tanashi didn't answer. He just looked at both of them quietly. There was no anger on his face. No panic. No desperation. That calm expression confused them even more. Lillian crossed her arms and gave another dismissive laugh. "You're bluffing," she said. "You don't have anything. If you did, you would have said it already." But Tanashi still didn't argue. He simply nodded once, like he had heard enough. Then he picked up his bag from the floor. Patrick watched him silently as he turned toward the hallway. For a moment it looked like his father wanted to say something, but the words never came out. Tanashi walked past them without another word and headed toward his room. Behind him, Kelvin chuckled again. "Man's acting like he's about to flip the whole situation," he joked. Lillian shook her head and sat down on the couch. 24 hours, she muttered, still amused. But upstairs, inside his room, Tanashi quietly closed the door. Then he walked to his desk and opened the drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was the same brown envelope his father had given him. He picked it up slowly, and for the first time since that night on the patio, he was finally ready to use it. That night the house became quiet again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It felt tense, like something was about to happen. Downstairs, Lillian and Kelvin were still talking and laughing, probably still joking about Tanashi's 24-hour deadline. But upstairs, inside his room, Tanashi sat at his desk with a brown envelope open in front of him. The same documents his father had given him years ago were spread across the table. The trust agreement, official stamps, legal signatures. Everything looked exactly the same as it had the night he first saw them. Back then they had just felt like a precaution. Tonight they felt like power. Tanashi picked up his phone and stared at the documents for a moment. His heart was beating faster than usual, but his mind felt clear. If Lillian wanted to turn this house into a battlefield, then the truth needed to come out. He made the first call. The lawyer. The number was written on the last page of the documents. After a few rings, a calm professional voice answered. Tanashi introduced himself and explained who his father was. The moment the lawyer heard Patrick's name, the tone of the conversation changed. "Oh, the trust," the lawyer said, immediately recognizing the case. Tanashi explained what had happened that evening. There was a short silence on the other end of the phone, and then the lawyer spoke again. "Well," he said calmly, "if someone is claiming ownership of the property, then it's time the trust becomes active." That was the first step. Next, Tanashi made a second call. This one was to the property management office that handled the legal records connected to the trust. They verified the documents and confirmed something important. The house was still fully protected under the trust agreement. No transfer, no sale, no change in ownership. The property was legally tied to Tanashi. Finally, he made the third call. The bank representative connected to the trust account. More verification, more confirmation. By the time the calls were finished, everything was officially activated. The legal protection his father had created years ago was now fully in motion. Tanashi leaned back in his chair and looked at the documents again. For years, they had just been papers sitting quietly in a drawer. But tonight they had become something else. Proof. Downstairs, the house was still quiet. Lillian probably believed she had already won. Kelvin was probably still laughing about it. They had no idea what had just started moving behind the scenes. Tanashi carefully placed the documents back into the envelope and set it on the desk. Then he looked out the window at the dark street outside. Because by the time the sun came up the next morning, something very unexpected was going to happen at that house. The next morning started like any other day in the neighborhood. The sun slowly rose over the quiet streets of Harare, and the house looked just as normal as it always had. But inside, the atmosphere was very different. Lillian was in the kitchen drinking coffee, looking completely relaxed. Kelvin was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone. From the way they were acting, it was clear they still believed the situation from last night was already finished. To them, Tanashi was just counting down his 30 days. But around mid-morning, something unusual happened outside the house. First, a long black car slowly pulled up in front of the gate. Then another one, and then a third. The vehicles looked expensive and official, the kind people notice immediately in a quiet neighborhood. A few neighbors even stepped outside their houses, curious about what was happening. Inside the house, Kelvin noticed first. Mom," he said, standing up and peeking through the window. "Why are there 3 black cars outside?" Lillian walked over, slightly annoyed at the interruption. But the moment she looked outside, her confident expression changed. Several well-dressed people were stepping out of the cars. One of them carried a briefcase. Another had a folder full of documents. They walked toward the gate with calm, professional steps. A minute later, the doorbell rang. Lillian frowned and walked to the door. When she opened it, she found 3 strangers standing there. One of them, a middle-aged man in a suit, spoke politely. "Good morning," he said. "We're here regarding the legal ownership of this property." Lillian blinked in confusion. "What are you talking about?" she asked. The man calmly opened his briefcase and pulled out several official papers. "We represent the legal trust connected to this house," he explained. At that moment, Tanashi slowly walked down the stairs behind them. Kelvin noticed him immediately. "What is this?" Kelvin demanded. The lawyer stepped slightly to the side and continued speaking in a professional tone. "These documents confirm that this property has been placed under a protected legal trust created by Patrick Moyo several years ago." He handed the papers forward. Lillian grabbed them and quickly looked through the pages. Her eyes moved faster and faster as she read the details. Then her face slowly lost its color. According to the documents, the house had never been transferred to her. It had never been placed in her name. And it never could be, because the trust agreement clearly stated that the property legally belonged to one person. Tanashi. The living room suddenly felt heavy with tension. Kelvin looked from the papers to Tanashi, completely stunned. Patrick sat frozen on the couch, staring at the floor again. And for the first time since the conversation started the night before, Lillian looked like she had just realized something had gone terribly wrong. The living room felt completely different now. Just a day ago, Lillian had been standing in the same place, confidently telling Tanashi he had 30 days to leave. But now everyone's attention was on the papers in her hands. Her fingers were slightly shaking as she flipped through the documents again, like she was hoping she had misunderstood something. The lawyer calmly stepped forward and began to explain. "As of last night," he said in a steady voice, "the trust agreement connected to this property has officially been activated." Lillian looked up quickly. "Activated? What does that even mean?" "It means the legal protection placed on this house by Patrick Moyo is now fully in effect," the lawyer replied. He opened another folder and showed additional documents. "This property was placed inside a protected trust several years ago. According to the agreement, the house cannot be transferred, sold, or claimed by anyone outside the trust." Kelvin frowned. "So what does that have to do with us?" The lawyer looked directly at him. "It means the house legally belongs to the beneficiary of the trust." There was a brief pause. "And the beneficiary is Tanashi." The words landed heavily in the room. Kelvin's confident expression disappeared almost instantly. His eyes moved quickly from the lawyer to his mother, then to Tanashi. That can't be right," he said nervously. "Mom said the house was already transferred." One of the officials from the property authority stepped forward with a tablet in hand. "We checked the official records this morning," she said clearly. "There has never been any legal transfer of ownership to Lillian Moyo." She looked directly at Lillian while speaking. "In the property registry, this house remains protected under the trust created by Patrick Moyo." Lillian's face slowly tightened. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice wasn't as confident anymore. Kelvin suddenly looked worried. "Wait, so you're saying we don't actually own this place?" he asked. No one answered him right away. Patrick was still sitting quietly on the couch, his hands clasped together. His face looked uncomfortable, like he had been expecting this moment but didn't know how to react to it. For a long moment, he still didn't say anything. Meanwhile, the confidence that had filled Lillian's voice the night before was slowly disappearing. Her shoulders were tense now. Her eyes kept moving between the documents and the people standing in the room. Just hours ago, she had been completely sure she controlled the house. But the truth was now sitting right in front of her. And the more the lawyer explained the legal details, the clearer it became that she had made a very serious mistake. The living room had gone completely quiet. No one was talking anymore. The lawyer had already explained everything, and the officials had confirmed the records. The truth was now sitting right there in the middle of the room, impossible to ignore. The house legally belonged to Tanashi. Just hours ago, Lillian had been standing confidently, telling him to pack his things and leave within 30 days. Now she was the one holding papers that proved she had no control over the house at all. Kelvin looked nervous. He kept glancing at his mother like he was waiting for her to say something that would fix the situation. But this time, Lillian didn't have an answer. Her confidence was fading quickly. That was when Tinashe finally spoke. He had been standing quietly near the staircase the entire time, watching everything unfold. His face was calm, but his eyes were serious. He slowly walked toward the center of the room. Everyone looked at him. Lillian straightened her posture slightly, trying to regain some control of the situation. But the tension in her face was obvious now. Tinashe stopped a few steps away from her. For a moment he said nothing. The silence made the room feel even heavier. Then he spoke in a calm, steady voice. "You gave me 30 days. The words immediately reminded everyone of the conversation from the night before. Kelvin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Tinashe paused for a second before continuing. "So now, you have 24 hours. The sentence landed like a shock. Kelvin's head snapped up. "Wait, what?" Lillian's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, she was the one looking stunned. Tinashe didn't raise his voice. He didn't sound angry. If anything, his calm tone made the message even more powerful. "You said this house wasn't my future anymore," he continued quietly. "But the documents say otherwise." He nodded toward the lawyer and the officials still standing in the room. "So now I'm giving you the same opportunity you gave me." Lillian's face tightened as the reality finally started sinking in. The situation had completely flipped. Just yesterday she believed she had all the power in that house. She believed she could decide who stayed and who left. But now the truth was impossible to ignore. She wasn't the one in control anymore. Tinashe looked around the room one last time before turning toward the staircase again. "You have 24 hours, he repeated calmly. And for the first time since this whole situation started, Lillian realized that the house she thought she owned was never really hers at all. By late afternoon, the tension in the house had shifted. The black cars and officials had left, but the weight of the morning's revelations still hung in the air. Lillian was no longer the confident, cold stepmother she had been yesterday. Her face was pale, her posture tense, and her earlier arrogance completely gone. She cleared her throat softly and spoke, her voice different this time. Careful, almost hesitant. "Tinashe, we should talk," she said. "We're family after all." The words sounded strange coming from her. The sharpness, the dismissive tone, the threats of yesterday. It was all gone. She stepped closer, trying to sound reasonable, polite even. Kelvin followed her lead, smiling in a way that was meant to be friendly, casual, as if nothing had happened. Tinashe remained where he was, leaning lightly against the staircase railing. He said nothing. His calm presence alone made the room feel heavy. He was watching, observing, every gesture, every word, every fake smile. Lillian's apology wasn't just a single sentence. It was the first sign of a total reversal. Years of disrespect, of being treated like an outsider in his own home, had disappeared in an instant. Her attitude softened, but it felt hollow. The laugh at his expense, the smug remarks, the cold dismissal, they were all replaced by polite gestures she didn't know how to carry convincingly. Kelvin tried to fill the silence with small talk, talking about his work, his university friends, his day. He laughed a little too loudly, trying to make Tinashe feel included, like they had suddenly returned to a normal family dynamic. But Tinashe's eyes didn't leave him. He could see the nervousness, the forced friendliness, the tiny cracks in their act. Lillian moved to the sofa and sat down, tucking her hands in her lap. I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did," she admitted, her voice low. We just thought, well, it doesn't matter. We should fix this. We should talk." Tinashe didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply watched. For years, he had been dismissed, ignored, disrespected in his own home. And now, in a single morning, the tables had turned. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to demand anything. The respect he had been denied for so long had finally come quietly, naturally, without forcing anyone to give it. He leaned back slightly, allowing the room to settle. The polite words, the friendly acts, they were desperate attempts to regain something they had lost. And Tinashe simply let them try, quietly observing, knowing that the balance had shifted. For the first time, he felt the calm satisfaction of seeing the truth recognized without him needing to fight for it. The house was his, and finally, so was the respect he had earned. The next morning, the house felt strangely quiet. The usual chatter of Lillian and Kelvin was gone. They had packed their things in a rush, their faces tight with embarrassment and defeat. The black cars were waiting outside again, this time to take them away for good. Tanashi watched from the staircase as they loaded their bags. Lillian avoided looking at him, her confidence completely gone. Kelvin kept trying to make small jokes, but they sounded hollow and forced. Neither of them said a word about the trust documents or the morning's revelations. They didn't need to. The truth had already spoken for itself. After the cars disappeared down the street, Patrick finally cleared his throat. He stepped closer to Tanashi, his expression awkward, unsure. "Sen. He started, but his words faltered. He didn't know how to bridge the silence that had built over years of unspoken tension and mistakes. Tanashi simply nodded, letting the moment pass without comment. There was nothing to rush, nothing to demand. Tanashi walked to the balcony, leaning on the railing as he looked out over the Harare skyline. The city stretched endlessly before him, a mix of shimmering buildings, bustling streets, and quiet neighborhoods. The sun reflected off the windows in golden streaks, and for the first time in years, the view felt entirely his own. He thought about everything that had happened, the disrespect, the arrogance, the cold words. And he realized something important. Respect wasn't something you could demand. It wasn't something you could force people to give. It was earned, slowly, quietly, by standing firm, by keeping your calm, by letting truth do its work. The morning had shown him that clearly. Lillian and Kelvin had tried to take the house, to act as if years of privilege gave them power. But in the end, the trust, the legal protection, and Tanashi's patience had turned the tables completely. He took a deep breath, letting the wind hit his face. The city felt alive beneath him, and for the first time, he felt fully at home in his own home. A small, quiet smile crossed his face as he whispered to himself, the words carrying the satisfaction of victory and the justice of patience. She gave me 30 days to disappear, so I gave her 24 hours to realize whose house it really was.